This is the Chi Codes Podcast with your host, Thomas Dockstader.
So, Heather, hey, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of reasons that I wanted you to come on. One, I am really impressed with what you do. You're helping individuals with the mind-body connection, really dealing with physical ailments that actually come from mental ailments. And I think your story is interesting because I think that you have gone through a lot of what a large majority of society is going through right now. But I think what's unique about your story is you didn't necessarily have to hit some major rock bottom traumatic incident in order to have this big shift in your awareness in trying to heal yourself, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, my story started in 2009, newly married. I was a big marathon runner back then. We were summiting Farmington Tower Peak, if you're familiar with Utah. We were going up and over. It was 26 miles that day, and I was probably 8 or 9 miles up, and I got severely dizzy, and I realized I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it up and over. So I turned around, went back, and by the time I got to my car, I had an extreme vertigo, and it lasted for months. And I was trying to figure out what the culprit was for that. I thought maybe I'm pregnant. Maybe I'm just not feeling my best self. Maybe I need glasses. Maybe there's something wrong with my vision. I went to a neurologist who told me you're a very dizzy girl, which was such a crap diagnosis. Yeah. And he did an MRI, and nothing was really helpful. I was changing my diet, having zero caffeine. Nothing was really touching it. So from there, I started having hormone problems, iron deficiency, chronic fatigue, chronic migraines, female issues, and a plethora of other symptoms. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't understand how someone perfectly healthy just totally took a nosedive, right? And so that was 2009. I spun my wheels till 2015 with all of those things. I went to every doctor, every naturopath, I tried every supplement. I was on hypothyroid medicine. I was on anxiety and depression medication. I was packing Xanax around in my purse just in case I needed it, which I can look back at that and just, it's heartbreaking to me to see that's where I was. Yeah. And I thought it was a physical problem, but it was an emotional.
Right. So, and this is a great point, right? Because I think a lot of people, we feel something's wrong physically. And I think that the default path that a lot of people go through is like, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor, and the doctor's going to give me some medication, and it's going to make me better because that's the problem. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like for 6 years, you went down that path, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, right? Like all these things that really you're just putting a lot of chemicals into your body, and who knows what the side effects of those are.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was suicidal. I had ideations at one point, and it scared the hell out of me. I thought, this is not me. This is not what I want. Why am I thinking these thoughts? It was a reality check of saying, what's going on in my mind? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And see, what I find so powerful, and I talk a lot about this on this show, but when we have unaddressed trauma, it comes out somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Somehow. And I think what's elusive about it is it does not come out directly affected to the issue that we maybe are dealing with, or the thing that we're suppressing. And again, in your case, it came out in these physical ways that there's not really a logical connection necessarily as to why it's coming out there, but the body is so intelligent that it has the capability to say, hey, you're ignoring me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get your attention.
Yeah. I'm going to keep giving you different symptoms until you reach your breaking point. Because our body is like a pressure cooker, and we just keep stuffing everything down, sealing that lid up real tight. And when we don't let any steam out, it's gonna burst. It's gonna come out as emotional rage. It's gonna come out as tantrums and fits and addictions and physical problems, disease and chronic pain. It's going to come out at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's when.
Right. So in 2015, what happened? What was that kind of like moment where you realized, oh, it's not the medication not going to help? Tell me about what happened that made you kind of make that connection and you started moving the other direction.
Sure. So it wasn't actually about me.
Okay.
It was about my husband, and who was also suffering at the same time. In 2010, he started having severe back pain. He was later diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, which is a severe kind of degenerative spine issue. He was having severe pain where he was not able to go into work. He really had to take a step back. He was kind of became a shell of who he was. And it was hard for me to watch because he retreated from himself. He retreated from our family, and our kids are like, what's wrong with Dad? What's wrong with you? Like, why are you laying on the couch? Why are we pulled over on the side of the road? Like, we don't get it, and it was just maddening to me. Like, why? What happened? Like, our marriage is good. What's the problem? Like, I don't understand why is it, like some kind of karmic something going on for us. And it broke my heart. And my husband became suicidal.
Oh, wow.
Because he was in such severe pain. He just didn't want to be here anymore. He's just like, it'd be easier to just not have such severe pain. And that broke my heart to hear, because here I am having my own ideations, being on medication. I firmly believe that was the culprit.
Yeah.
And here he is wanting to take his life. And I'm just like, we've got this blended family. How are we going to survive this?
So that's interesting to me as well, because even while you were having these struggles yourself, and I believe in this heavily, that a lot of times we have this built-in lack of self-worth for many reasons, right?
Oh, totally.
Like for many reasons. We absorb it when we're children, right?
Yeah.
And for you, even though you were having these struggles, it actually took someone else that was struggling, and I would say that's classic mother behavior, right?
Totally.
Where it's like, oh, forget about me. I'm going to take care of someone else.
1,000%.
And so you went the extra mile in trying to discover, hey, what can
I do for him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
So in 2015, my husband's a financial advisor. Every year we'd go to these conferences. And this year was in Vegas, and I would go with him just to escape motherhood. And I'd sit by the pool and we'd go to dinners and things like that. And it was just something I would look forward to, just to have a break from reality. And at the same time, leading up to this conference, I had been praying to God for something. Give me something. These doctors don't have the answers. These prescriptions are not the answers. These surgeries are not the answers. Just send me something. And so I went to this breakout session I would go to, these health sessions. They were interesting to me. And this doctor was talking about how stress affects the body. And he was talking about, most of these people that have chronic pain and disease, they're perfectionistic, they're high achievers, they're very type A personality. And I was like, that's my husband. Not realizing that it's also me, right? And I'm like, this makes sense for him. This is him. And so I went back to the pool that day with my friends, and I was scrolling Amazon trying to find this book, and I couldn't find that specific doctor's book, but I found a different one, Dr. John Sarno's book, Healing Back Pain. Yep. And I read all the reviews, and it was, I knew intuitively, like without 1 ounce of, I knew that it was the right thing. And I said, I ordered you this book. And I feel like this is the answer. And he was like, I'll try anything at this point. Yeah. So he reads the book and he's like, yeah, this makes total sense. But I have a diagnosis. Like, I have the blood factor. And so the doctor said, the white coat said, this is what I have. And I'm like, yeah, but this I just knew that this was, I'm like, just keep reading it, just keep understanding. So he read all the Dr. Sarna books, all the Steve Ozanich books, all the Dr. Schubner books, and about how stress affects the body. And meanwhile, he's reading these books, and he said, this talks about chronic fatigue in here and all the things that you're going through, right? And I was like, it does? Because I hadn't read the book, but I just knew it was the right thing for him because it said back pain, right? So he's like, you need to read these books. So I did, and I devoured them, and it was fascinating. And I was like, oh, I totally see myself in these personality traits, right? Because perfectionism, you're going to have a cortisol response. Overachiever, cortisol response, right? You're going to just be in these heightened states of making these heightened chemicals, and you're going to be in the fight and flight all the time. Your body has no time for rest and repair ever. And I'd been in that mode my entire life. I was raised to be a perfectionist through religious conditioning, through my parents, through, that was just the personality I developed at the time, right? And so within 3 months, I was off of all medication, all supplements. I was hook, line, and sinker. This makes sense to me. And in the meantime, I had been going to a craniosacral therapist who was saying, the reason you have hypothyroidism is because you're not speaking your truth, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, how do you know that, right? And I hadn't spoke my truth at all my entire life. I was very much like a people pleaser. And
do you think, so when you say speak your truth, do you think that you didn't know how, right?
Yeah.
And see, I talk about this a lot because I think that a lot of with coping mechanisms and with valuing ourselves and having confidence and trust in ourselves, that's not taught or established as a child.
Yeah.
Just not.
No.
One, because I think our parents don't know how to do it or haven't known how to do it. They weren't taught. Yeah. And it's like this generational thing that just flows down.
Totally.
So it's no one's fault. I don't blame anyone for it.
Not at all.
But we're not taught how to do it. And so it's like you got pushed to this like breaking point. And what's funny is that you left yourself behind and you were totally helping your husband, which I think that's great. But I teach heavily in my program that you can't help someone if you don't help yourself, really.
Yeah.
And so you read it now and it led to you, it basically changed your life. And a lot of it was just mindset shift, right?
Yeah.
So that's incredible. I think that in this day and age, right, you coach people, correct? And so when talk to me, I'm interested to understand because you yourself struggled for 6 years and then your husband started struggling. And I believe that also maybe if you would have read some of those books earlier, you're not on the right vibration to receive the information and you would have just discounted it.
Oh, totally.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So when you're talking with your students, with the people that you work with, talk to me a little bit about their mindset and what are they coming to you because they're at a breaking point? Are they talk to me a little bit about some of the people that you work with and where they are and what you kind of have to do with them to kind of get them to that place. Because I feel like that's the biggest challenge, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because you can give them gold.
Oh, and that's what got me coaching is because I was a cosmetologist by trade for almost 20 years at that point.
So you were a therapist.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so I'm just chatting away with people all day long and people are telling me their physical problems and this and that, and I don't feel good. And I'm like, want me to tell you why? I'll tell you why. And so I'm on the phone with friends and I'm chatting with my neighbors and my husband's like, hello, are you coming home? You're just going to chat with the whole world all the time, And I'm like, I'm talking about the mind-body connection and I'm telling him what their issues are. And he's like, well, you just need to be a coach.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know anything about that. And he's like, yeah, you do. and so my husband, he was like, Heather, you would be really good at this. You know a lot. You are good with talking to people. You have a good heart and good intentions. You really should consider it. And so I did. And I opened up my business in 2018 and, I found out quick, you cannot force feed anybody this information. If they're not ready for it, you are it's falling on deaf ears. And so, most people who come to me are at a breaking point. They've tried Western medicine, and Western medicine has failed them. And they've had addictions, they've had traumas. And so I quickly discovered that I have to do what's called a discovery process with my clients, because if they're completely unaware, then I'm not of use. I cannot give them any information if they're unaware of their behaviors, of their traumas, of their perceptions and things that have gone on in their life. Because a lot of people come to me and they're like, I had a great childhood. I don't know, my body just doesn't work, And so I do the deep digging with my clients and I present to them possibility. And then the light comes on, and then they're like, wow, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
And so if you're unaware that you're unaware, then you can't see anything.
Right.
But if you become aware that you were unaware, then you're like, oh my gosh, so now what?
Yeah.
So then you can educate and you become aware that you're aware, and that's when the healing happens.
Right. Yeah. You know what's so interesting? I was raised in the FLDS and a cult basically. And I'm telling you, like, even in my mid 20s and early 30s, I was like, I had a great childhood. That's how, like, it's so hard to explain, but that's how, like, unaware
Totally.
I was.
Totally.
Where the world could totally, they're like, what are you talking about? Which, again, it's like my mom and dad were there and it was good, right? But also there was a lot of bad stuff happening that I was just blocking out, walling off, right? Like putting away, pushing it down. Sure. And it's all surfacing in addiction.
Oh, sure.
Every ounce of it.
Yeah.
And just to your point, it's like, I think the society we're in right now, and honestly, I think Ozempic is even worse for us, because everyone is initially looking for the Ozempic solution, right?
Totally.
Just give me a shot and boom, everything's good. Give me a pill and I'm happy and everything's good, right?
Yeah.
Alcohol, weed, right? Like these daily uses of they just numb us. And I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize what they're doing is they're slowly just pushing that stuff further down. They're not addressing it and they're hiding it. And eventually, in some way, and a lot of times physical, right? It will come out.
Oh yeah.
And it's, and so I think, that's a big reason I started this podcast is I'm like, it's another avenue in which to plant a seed in someone's head about, oh, maybe there's another way to think about it.
Yeah.
So once you kind of like started shifting everything, right? And things started changing 2016, 2017, and you started it in 2018. Let's go back a little bit, and I want to understand, like, what are the things that you felt like you discovered that were some of the sources of some of this stuff? Because you mentioned perfectionism and things like that. Like, talk to me a little bit about your journey in like going through that process of discovering how you did it, right? Because I think that's what people are very interested in. They're saying like, well, I have those problems, but what did you do, right?
Oh man. So when you talk about, basically I went off of medication, my antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. And that was like opening up this reservoir.
Because now you can feel.
Yeah. Cause now I can feel, cause I have been numb for years, I went through a divorce. I was betrayed. I stepped away from my religious, everything. I'd been brought up in religion my whole life. I got remarried. I had a blended family, which was a very tumultuous thing, with two exes who were making not the best of decisions. And we had the fear of safety of our children all the time. And so that was kind of the culmination of things. And so I had to feel for the first time. And I think I cried enough for one person for my entire lifetime. So it was opening up this reservoir. And mind you, I'd been taught my whole life, don't cry, because I was a feeler as a little girl. I had big feelings. I'd see a deer on the side of the road and I'd cry in the back seat, and very, very emotional. And I remember my mom told me when I was probably 7, she just is like, quit crying, because my emotions were too big for her. And I still get emotional thinking about it. And I remember I was at my grandma's house and I was in the bathroom and I was washing my hands and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't cry today. I didn't cry all day. I'm like so proud of myself. And I'm going to go the whole week and I'm not going to cry because that's going to make my mom happy. And that became who I was. Now I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to show emotion. I'm tough. And for me to let down that wall was a lot.
Yeah.
And for my husband to witness that, he was like, holy shit. And I remember locking myself in my bathroom and just sobbing and my kids pounding on the door. Mom, you okay, Mom? What's wrong? Heather, open the door, And it was just self-discovery after, oh my gosh, look at this past, look at this, all these things that I've become and who I've tried to be. And that's not even me at all. And I intuitively knew it.
Yeah.
And I had shut myself off from myself my entire life. And it showed up in religion. It showed up in every choice I'd make leading up to the first time I got married because of religion. And I'm not blaming,
Sure.
I grew up in the LDS church and I thought it was great. For 24 years, I thought it was the best thing in the world. And I started being aware that things weren't adding up, and intuitively in my heart, in my gut, I knew that it wasn't what I thought it was my whole life.
Yep.
And I got married because I thought no one's going to want me. So I better marry that person that, I've made these bad decisions with. And that ended up being a terrible decision because he had childhood trauma of his own, and a perfectionistic and a childhood trauma, you're not going to do good,
Hurt people, hurting people.
Oh, all the time, and I can look back at that and I don't put any blame on him, but for years I did.
Yeah.
I said, you did this to me. Look what you did to me. All these things, all this shit we're going through is because your choices. And I never looked in the mirror until I ripped that Band-Aid off. And I was like, no, I have full ownership of my part in that.
I think that is a super hard thing for everyone to get to that place where, just like you said, right? Like, I mean, you just mentioned a bunch of things, right? That pop up for me when you're saying that stuff, like your mom told you not to cry, right? Like, and again, that's just her projecting her lack of capability to feel. And it's not her fault either, right? Because it's just,
because it was probably told to her.
Yeah, it's just all inherited, right?
Yeah.
So it's not her fault. But the problem is, I see this so often. People go through the same progression. When they have a problem, the first thing they do is say, it's someone else's fault that I have this problem. And I did it for years. I blame my parents. Why did you raise me in this religion? Why couldn't I have just gone to a normal high school? Why couldn't I have just gone to, had these normal things, because then I would have been normal. That's what I thinking, right?
Totally.
It's not until you come to this place, and I believe that's probably this big flood of crying, when you come to this place where you're like, oh, it's my fault. Now, I don't want people to misconstrue that. What I mean by that is, if something happens to you, whatever it is, whether someone perpetrated against you or whatever, that's over. It's over now.
Yeah.
And so there's this really hard truth of understanding that no one can make it better but me. And I have to make it better with myself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people really struggle to get over that hump because it's so difficult, because they do want to blame. And it's that progression of, I believe in healing, where if we're in the victim mentality, I can't help anyone when they're in victim mentality. It just, no one can come to them and apologize and make it better. It won't.
Yeah.
And they have to accept that it's their cross to bear, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned tons of things. So I think a lot of people in Utah can relate to this, but when you leave the religion, because it's been in your life for a long time, right? And you're going to church, and for me, we had church at school. I went to Alta Academy with Warren Jeffs as our principal, and he was, since I was in first grade, he was we were having him preach to us every single day.
Wow.
So it was just, you just get filled with it constantly.
Totally.
And one thing that I think is pretty consistent, at least with the FLDS, was that I was constantly told I was not good enough, constantly.
Yeah.
And the only way that I could be good enough is outside of me. It's to be to the church, give to the church, and that is where it all goes wrong. Because the truth is, and I didn't discover this until later on, that it's all inside of me. Everything is inside of me. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle, because when we leave those religions, because it's restrictive, I see this big like pendulum effect that happens where people go way the other way, drinking, drugs, this, that, blah, blah, blah.
Hating God. Yeah.
Yeah. Hating God and just like all of those things. So for you and your experience, I'm curious to understand, like, what was that like for you when you just decided, hey, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore? What was that process like in kind of like getting to a place where now it sounds like you've accepted and you're good?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people leave and they're very hateful and angry against the church. And it's like, I don't feel that way at all. It's just discovering yourself. And then, you understand that everyone that's doing that they ultimately want to do the same thing you're doing. They just can't figure out how to do it. So for you, what was that process like?
So I was married in the temple to my first husband. And when I was betrayed, I thought I am gonna marry Peter Priesthood, because my ex didn't grow up, very strict LDS. And so that's why he cheated on me. That was my belief, which is so silly for me to think of now. But it was like concrete. This is the evidence. This is why it didn't work. And so I was going to marry Peter Priesthood. He was going to be a return missionary. He was going to be strict. His whole family was going to be very strict LDS, and that's what I wanted, right? So I dated all these guys, all return missionaries, and all of these relationships, every single one superficial. And I could not have one deep conversation with any of these people, and they didn't want to hear anything that happened to me. They just wanted to pretend like that never happened, and then they just wanted to move forward. And I was like, but look at this. Don't you want to look at this with me? Because I'm still trying to figure this out. And that was really hurtful to me, that no one wanted to look at that. They just wanted to put their blinders on and pretend like that wasn't a part of my past. And I was like, no, this is like a huge piece of me right now. And I met my husband now, Billy, and he was not LDS. And and I was like, oh man, I really like this guy because we connect. We have a lot of things in common. He was also betrayed. He also was raising his kids, and we shared a trauma bond. Is kind of what it started as, and we weren't intimately connected. We were friends. We were the best of friends for 6 months before we even went on one date, and it was this back and forth, and just this peace that I felt with him, and I felt safe. I felt like I could tell him anything and he would not judge me, and it felt safe for the first time in my life.
Isn't that so interesting? Because like you were saying, I see this often, right, with relationships, and a lot of times people go from one type to the other, right? Like it's like, oh, I'm not, this guy was this way, and so I'm going to go the real strict, right? But your energy brought in your husband, right?
Yeah.
And even though in your conscious mind, it wasn't the person that you thought you wanted, but your energy brought it in, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think what you discovered more than anything is that your voice before, which you couldn't, you didn't have, or it was suppressed or whatever. This person was encouraging it versus other guys you dated who didn't encourage it, and they didn't want you to, right? Which ultimately, it sounds like to me, his supportiveness kind of helped you get to the place where you found that healing, right?
Yeah.
Versus, I can imagine other types would
dismiss,
encourage the doctor, right? Encourage the medication, go take some medication. I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, him not being LDS and me still being very LDS, we got engaged and we're like, how's this going to work? How's this going to work? Because neither one of us were willing to give. And so we're like, hey, we're going to go to your...
But you got engaged.
Yeah, but we got engaged. But we're like, we'll just figure it out because we know we can't live without each other. And even to back up, I broke up with him a month after dating him because I felt guilt and shame that what are my parents going to think? What if I put myself right back in the situation where I'm betrayed again? And what are my parents going to think of me? They're going to say, you dummy, you did the same thing, right? You made the same choice. You're going to end up in the same situation. And so it scared me. And I, out of guilt and shame, I told him I can't date you because you're not LDS. and it hurt him. And
was he ever a part of it at all?
No, his family, his great grandma was her husband chose polygamy. Okay. And she was like, hell no. And so she was out. And so that set the trajectory of his family on the opposite path. But he did have a lot of family, cousins and things that were still.
So was he not religious at all?
Oh no, they went to just a non-denominational Christian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So he was baptized in a non-denominational and he was Christian and he would go to his non-denominational Christian church with his own kids of his own free will, being a dad of 3, single dad, right? And that spoke to me. That spoke to me saying he values God. He values that relationship. And everybody else I'm dating, they're going because they feel pressure to, because their parents or whoever's. And so I was like, he actually desires that. And that means more to me than anything.
Yeah.
And so I end up having this conversation with my mom and she's like, where's Billy? How come you guys aren't, what's going on? And why are you moping around the house? And I'm like, well, I broke up with him. And she's like, well, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, I thought she'd be proud of me. And and I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, that was dumb. And I was like, well, I don't even, like, my tongue was just tied. I don't know. I thought you'd be proud of me and she was like, just because people aren't Mormon doesn't mean anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, she just freaking gave me permission to be myself.
Oh my gosh. It's so, I think about this all the time. Like I'm obsessed with it. Like, how do I encourage, like I have one son, 12 years old. How do I encourage him to find himself? Right? I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
Because for so much of my life, I didn't know how. And so often we do things to make other people happy.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't, and we're so, and a lot of times we're unaware of it, right? Yeah. Like, I feel like we're unaware of it, how much we're doing based on what we think will ultimately give us that approval.
Yeah.
See, this is what I discovered about a year ago. This thing called validation. We are constant. It is life.
Oh, totally.
We are constantly seeking it at all times, subconsciously. We may not even be aware of it. We are constantly seeking validation, even to the level that if you want your child to do good, why?
Yeah, because it's about
you. So then you're good.
Yeah.
So then you can, if your child does good, then you can tell yourself, I'm good.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
It is.
That you don't have most of us don't have the capability to say, I'm good without any external validation. So this whole life is that.
Yeah.
And we're constantly seeking it, right? From all aspects at all times, with our job and our money and our this and our that. Yeah. And the revelation that I had in ayahuasca was this, like, you can validate yourself.
Yeah.
You can validate yourself. And when that happened to me, I was like, oh, I have to tell the world. I have to tell everyone they can do it themselves. But just like you said, if someone isn't on that level, vibrational level, they do not hear it.
Yeah.
They cannot hear it. They're
in fear.
They're deaf to it.
Yeah.
They cannot hear it. So how do you feel? I love this because this just proves the universal truth of it all, right? Because you have found this in an entirely different path than I did, right?
Oh yeah.
But it's exactly the same, no matter what.
We're all coming to the same point. I feel like that's our divine design, is to all come to the same conclusion that we have infinite worth. We are born with it. It is not something that we have to work for to achieve. It's not something someone else gives to us. We give it to ourselves.
Yeah. What's so wild is like for years, I was in my mind, I'm on this healing journey, right? And I want to be healed. Okay. And I do all this stuff, right? And I read all these books and I do all the meditation and I learn all this stuff and I do all this stuff. And then I finally go do ayahuasca last year and I go through that, and it's a challenging, powerful experience. And at the very, 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 very end, when I'm just sitting there and my mind is just vibrating at the highest level and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can validate myself. This is so amazing. And then I said to myself, I'm healed. And the medicine said to me, you were never not.
Yeah.
You never needed healing.
Yeah, exactly.
You just wanted to go on a healing journey. You were always this. What you found right now, you're always this.
I love that.
And I was like, oh,
that's awesome.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
So then it's like, all right, how do we find like-minded people? How do we collectively, because I really believe like life is just it's this pool of water and we're constantly creating these ripples in everything that we do.
Yeah.
And if I affect one person and then they affect one person, right? It's just like this
trajectory.
Yeah. And so that's why I think like, look, you and I, we kind of do the same thing, right? We help people. Okay. And your approach might be a little bit different. Your voice is different. But the cool thing is it's like you could reach people I can't reach. I can reach people you can't reach.
Totally.
But without us even talking to each other, we're bringing people to the same place.
Yeah.
Which it's like makes my heart scream. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so incredible.
Yeah.
And it's so validating, right? That people are finding this path with all the noise in the world, right? Like I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I'm curious, when you're dealing with your clients now, the politics and like all this stuff that's happening, how much of that do you think affects them? Like how many people get sucked into like, well, what if, right? Like, what if this happens? What if this happens? Like, how do you kind of wrangle them and kind of like help them understand that it doesn't matter?
Well, I think everybody's living in the past and the future.
Okay.
Nope.
Explain that.
So we're constant. I mean, what's the first thing you wake up in the morning? What's the first thing that you think about?
What am I going to do?
Yeah. Right. And so a couple of years ago, I was watching the movie Groundhog Day. You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Classic. I thought that movie was so annoying as a kid, but as an adult, a couple of years ago, I watched it again and I was like, holy shit, this is the mind-body connection at play. And so I discuss this with clients, how, we wake up in the morning and we do the same thing. We take the same road and we have the same thoughts and feelings and emotions and we come home and we go to bed, right? Same thing, Groundhog Day. How many times do we get in our car and we drive to work and we're like, oh, how did I get here? I wasn't even paying attention. It's just, we're a machine. We just get up and we do, and we don't think. We don't think. We're thinking about, if you're driving and you got to work and you don't know how you got there, it's because you're thinking about something in the past or something you have to do in the future. It's not because you're present. And so often people are just unaware that they're thinking of the past. They're unaware that they're thinking of the future. And so I love the metaphor of Groundhog Day, the movie, because what happens in that movie, he has to go to Punxsutawney and talk about Groundhog Day, and he's pissed because that he's above that, right? Well, he gets there, he does his job, he goes to bed, wakes up, it's Groundhog Day. He's confused. He's waking up. He's in denial. He's in denial. This is his life. What's happening? I'm so confused. You know, how often do we wake up and we're confused? How is this my life, right? And so he keeps going, and eventually he moves through the stages of grief. Really, he moves into anger, and he starts punching people. You know, he's pissed. He's like, I don't want to be in Groundhog Day. This is pissing me off. Why are the same people saying the same things? How do I get to the next day? And as the movie evolves, you know, what happens? He tries to take his life. How many of us try to take our life in a passive suicide, right? Addictions and different behaviors and just coping through life. That's a passive suicide.
Yeah.
And then you keep evolving in the movie. He tries to make a woman fall in love with him, right? How often are we like, oh, when I get the new house, the new truck, the new this, the new that, then I'll be happy, right? It's like accumulation will make me feel good, and then I'll be able to live this life. Mm-hmm. Well, we eventually get to this place where it's not working. None of these things are working. We're not feeling any better. The anger's not working. The denial's not working. The passive suicide's not working. The accumulation of things, we still feel unfulfilled, right? We're not moving on to the next day. So eventually we get to this place where he wakes up in the movie, and well, backing up, he starts saving people, saving cats from the trees, you know, saving people that he's listening on the radio. What's going to happen? I'm going to save the day, and swooping in and saving the day. And because he's accepted that I'm going to be in Groundhog Day. Mm-hmm. He's come to a place of acceptance. So I think for me, I've come to a place of acceptance of my childhood. I've come to a place of acceptance of my parents and their behaviors. I've come to a place of acceptance of religion and really leaving that and what it all meant, and all the emotions that encompass it, and a divorce and betrayal and what that means, you know. And you come to a place of acceptance, blending a family and overcoming physical conditions, when you're no longer in resistance and you can accept, this is where I'm at, and I'm trusting the path because look at everything it's made me become. Mm-hmm. Then we can move and evolve from Groundhog Day, and we become way more aware than we ever were.
That's such a great analogy. I love that movie, by the way. And I think that's I never caught on to viewing it that way, actually, in his, you know, going through that denial stage and fighting it and then trying to fill that void. Right. Mm-hmm. But you're 100% right. And I talk about that all the time, like Groundhog Day, like our lives. Oh my gosh. We're just in this automatic. There's one lesson that I give in my courses that talks about intentional and unintentional routines. And because I think a lot of people resist, or they have a challenge with trying to implement a routine. And when I explain it to them that you are in a routine, you 100% are in a routine all the time.
Totally.
What do you do when you wake up? You do the same things every day. Boom, 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 all the time. Those small things you're doing all the time are creating your life.
Yeah.
So it's easy to take control of that and say like, oh, wait a minute. Instead of hitting the snooze button, I'm going to wake up when I do, when I'm supposed to, right? Like I'm going to wake up when I want to. That's an intentional versus an unintentional, right?
For sure.
And you're creating instead of like resisting or numbing your way through, because I feel like that's a lot of what happens. So interesting. This weekend, we went to the University of Utah football game.
Nice.
And for some, I don't know if it's because I'm sober that I notice how drunk people are, but there was people throwing up everywhere. But anyway, this one guy who was like 2 rows up from us, he fully passed out was laying on his face in the bleachers. The cops had to come, everything. He couldn't even stand up.
Wow.
This is what I'm thinking while it's happening. There's two types of people.
Mm-hmm.
There's the type that were also in that state of drinking, but they're like, he went way too far.
Yeah.
How sad is that? He went way too far, while they're also pretty drunk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm viewing it from the perspective of like, why did that particular person, what kind of pain is he going through that he feels the need that he has to go so deep into numbing himself, even when he's at a game. Like he's at a distraction already. Mm-hmm. And there's something driving him that he needs to go so deep into numbing because there's something so far down there that is causing him pain.
Yeah.
That's how I view it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people don't view it that they like there's different levels of this vibration and you see what you see, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm just like, I remember being that way. I remember being at those games and being so drunk that I don't even remember them. Mm. And I just thought that's just what you do, right? Mm-hmm. You like just we follow the crowd around and we just do what everyone does. Yeah. When in reality, I'm wasting my life, completely wasting it and just numbing my way through it.
Yeah.
Right. It makes me really sad. Like the level of empathy that I have for people is just like, it's not a thing of like, oh, you're disgusting because you did that. It's really like, how do I like reach these people? Mm-hmm. How do I help them? Because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to be that way. I'm curious when you talk about addiction with folks that you work with, like what are some of the findings that you've come through and discovered with the people you've worked with when it comes to addiction? I mean, or helpful things for them?
Oh, I mean, I think we really have to bring it always boils back to childhood. Mm-hmm. It always boils back to why are you numbing the pain? And so for me, the discovery process, that first meeting I do, I ask all those questions. And so in the following meeting, I like to do this little exercise where I ask people kind of in a tricky way. I get to figure out what their top 10 fears are. Mm. And those fears are actually belief systems. Mm. And they're not always true.
Okay.
They're never true.
Right.
Right? Because all these things that we're so afraid of are never true. Mm-hmm. Right? And all these things we believe for certainty, they're not true. All of us, for the most part, believed in Santa Claus when we were little. We were damn sure he came down the chimney, right?
Yeah.
And upon evidence, you discover a belief system can be undone very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I think for most people with addiction, you have to figure out what their fear. What's your fear? Mm. Is it a lack of worth? Is it, something someone told you you're always going to be a failure, so you accepted that as your reality? And we really have to boil things down. And the first time I listed out my fears, and I did this little tricky way that I do things, it made me sob because I believed all those things, all those fears. I believed them. And when I discovered that they weren't true, it was the biggest sense of relief and gave me permission to move forward and away from those things that were holding me back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge too, because when we talk about, just like you said, oh, well, I thought my childhood was good, and right, like, I think a lot of people, we bury it, right? Mm-hmm. One thing I do that I take people through is I do a hypno session where I kind of like help them. It's this, I guide them down this elevator and I walk them into this room and I tell them, give them some certain instructions. And I'm telling you, so I tell them to do all this stuff. And then once they do all this stuff, then I have them walk to the end of this hall and I have them open this door. And when they open this door, they will see the childhood version of the source of that pain, anger, abandonment, whatever it is. And what's so funny is every time I do it, after the fact, when I talk to the person, they're always confused as to why that particular event came up. And they're like, oh, I didn't ever think of that. Yeah. I never thought of that. I did it with someone recently where I asked them about abandonment. And when they opened the door, it was their 9-year-old self. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, she was like, I don't know why. I don't even remember what was happening then. And then we kind of figured it out. It was right around 9/11. It was right around, like, her family was moving. And we started to piece it all together. And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, that's when I first felt anxiety. And I remember how weird it felt. these things are locked in us, right? Yeah. They're locked in us. And it's like, I think, just like you say, it's like people have to be willing to go on this journey because we're going to have to accept things. It's just like you said, the awareness, right? Where we have to accept these things or be willing to at least be open to trying to maybe see something a little bit different than what we did before.
For sure.
Yeah, that's it's such a challenge, but I think it's so awesome that you're doing that work. What are some of the things that you would say, like as far as like messages to people, like what are the things that are just common denominators that keep coming up with you, with the clients that you work with, beyond just like the childhood trauma, but like if you were to say to like someone who's like listening to this and says, "Oh, I'm interested," what is something for them that they could be like the first thing they could look at, or items that you found are useful for some of your clients that, you know, have come up consistently?
So I love showing people the emotion associated with the physical condition.
Okay. Let's talk about that.
I have a 2 different books that are like my second Bibles. Okay. The first one is Feelings Buried Alive, Never Die by Carol K. Truman. That book talks about, you know, how you feel things as a, you know, in vitro, like in the womb, you are feeling the emotions of your mother. At conception, the emotions of your mother and father at conception are ingrained in you already. Right. And so it talks a lot about that. And it goes through, you know, how even though you think you're fine, like we hear all the time, it's okay. It's fine. It's not. When I sit with my clients and I say, but that's not fine. And I give them permission for them to not let it be fine. Then the reservoir can open up and it can flow. Right. Because everybody's like, be tough. You know, I had to be tough my whole life too, you know, but when someone gives you permission to be yourself, gives you permission to feel an uncomfortable feeling and gives you permission to not let things be okay, then that's the turning point. And so this book, Feelings Buried Alive, at the back of it has a plethora of symptoms, physical conditions, and the emotions associated with it. And so that's kind of where I start with when I have clients with a lot of physical conditions. I say, okay, let's talk about this. This condition, when did it start? And they'll say, 5 years ago. And I say, what was going on 5 years ago? And they tell me, you know, this and this and that. And I'm like, were you feeling any of these feelings? And I read the feelings associated with that emotion. And they're just like, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly right. You know, and if that's not evidence enough, you know, it's within our chakra system. Our chakra system keeps all these things. And if we're not releasing them, then they will always stay there. Right. Right. And and the longer term and the more intense that emotion is, the worse that condition will be, like cancer and whatnot. Yeah.
I think that's such a great point. You know, it's funny that you just said that. I feel like a challenge that I've faced, especially when I talk about like meditation or anything like that, there's like this society surface level view, and it's like, oh, that's for like hippies or for a monk. I can't, like, I want to scream from the rooftops. Like, meditation is one of the most powerful tools that there is, that exists. And it just doesn't have to be related to anything religious, or just throw it all out. It's literally a tool. Yeah. It is a tool that works so well. Oh yeah. It is absolutely incredible. So I feel like when you start to talk to people about some of that stuff, there's like that instant, like, that's not for me. I had a student that, I told him, I was like, you need to meditate. And, he told me later on, he's like, when you first told me that, he's like, I'm not going to do that. And then I just challenged him. I was like, just do 1 minute a day. Just do 1 minute a day. Now he's doing 20 and 30 minutes a day. And he's like, I'll never not do it. And it's this, like, it's such a challenge to get over that, like,
belief
programming. Belief of what they think it is, even though they've never done it and they don't know anything about it. what you said about emotions, this is something that I've come to realize like really strong this last couple of years is when I first got sober, I created this vision for myself. And I was like, I want to be happy regardless of my career or relationship status or anything like that. And that was fine. I've completely shifted away from that now. Because happiness is just one of the emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Where no one, this is a APB to everyone out there, no one is going to feel happy all the time.
Yeah.
It's not a thing.
Yeah.
What I have come to now, and you said this earlier, which I love, is I want to accept everything all the time. Because those emotions that we have, I want to be able to feel them. Like you said, crying, right? For men, there is a standard.
Yeah.
You don't cry, right?
Yeah.
It is just a standard.
It's so sad.
And you're a weak person if you cry.
Yeah.
And I hate that
because
I've had some really great crying sessions that I had this reoccurring dream. Someone from my past was in my dream for 25 years.
Wow.
She would just sit in the back and be in my dreams for 25 years. And finally I sat down and I just wrote all this stuff about her and this and that and everything and all these things. And then I decided to go grab some lunch. And as I'm driving in the truck, I just start busting out into tears. I had to pull over. I've never cried so uncontrollably in my life. And it was because I had finally allowed myself to process those things that had happened with that individual. But what I know now is that emotions, they are not bad.
They're uncomfortable.
You can be the most enlightened person in the world and still feel angry because the emotion is a flag that your body is trying to tell you something. It is a warning light or it's like the dash light on your car. Yeah. It's like, check it. Hey, there's a thing that doesn't sit right with you.
Exactly. You're not being true to most pain that we have is coming to show us that we're portraying a character that's not true to us. We literally are putting on a mask every day and saying, this is who I want you to perceive me as, but it's never the true you.
Right. Yeah. I love that. And for me, it's like, oh my gosh. Because for a long time I was thinking, I'm like, man, I've done all this healing and why am I feeling this way or why am I feeling that way? And I finally come to the realization, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a warning system. It's an intelligent system that's helping me understand that there's something that I don't believe, that something's not right or wrong. Let me sit with it. Let me understand it. Instead of trying to fight or push away, that's where I think the coping comes in. It's like, oh, I'm not feeling happy. Let me drink so I can feel something that's not that.
Yeah.
Right? When in reality, if we're running from those emotions, we're not listening to our own indicating system that's helping us guide us, right? Yeah. Which is just such a huge, it's such a powerful thing that it's available to us that no one's teaching us how to utilize it, right?
Yeah.
And I think you said it best in just acceptance. I can't say that word enough. Acceptance and saying like, oh, this is here for a reason. This is telling me something. There's something I haven't dealt with. And I don't think that I'll ever deal with road rage completely. If someone cuts me off, I think I'm just always going to get angry no matter what. But I'll accept that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, so we're about out of time here, but I want you to kind of tell me what services you offer. Tell me how people can get in touch with you, and the type of people that you're typically, will work well with your coaching.
Sure. So I work with, all men, women, and teens. I've worked with a few children, but I've discovered if your children are struggling, it's best to work with the parents because the root problem, 99.9% of the time boils back to the parents. So I'm open to all people. I offer in-person and Zoom. I do one-on-one coaching of chronic pain and disease and emotional trauma. I also am a certified intuitive craniosacral therapist, so I do that as well. And
what is that exactly?
Okay. For those who don't know, We have 7 energy systems within our body,
okay.
right? And they all hold certain emotions. So you have the root chakra, which is, your lower region. You have the sacral chakra, which is your reproductive area. You have your solar plexus, which is kind of your gut. You have your heart chakra, your throat chakra, self-explanatory. Your third eye, which is like how people perceive you, and your crown chakra, which is your connection to your higher power. So we have specific emotions that get trapped in specific energy centers. Mm-hmm. And this can be from childhood. This can be from being in the womb. This can be generational. Mm-hmm. So all these things work on an energetic level. And so people come to me and I assess their chi, right? And so I can feel if it's stuck, if it's just completely rock solid. If I can get that chi moving, then we're in business.
Okay.
Right. So then I start going through each of the chakras and I start pulling out childhood stuff, mostly in the root chakra, right? Reproductive stuff. That's mostly sexual stuff, money issues. Solar plexus. This is like your sense of worth, right? This is where am I worthy? Am I, disconnected from myself, things like that. Your heart chakra, all your heartbreaks and your loss and your grieving and all these things, right? Your throat chakra, which was a huge thing for me, your ability to speak your truth and to feel heard and to not be harsh and critical of yourself or others. Your third eye is your perception of reality, right? How do you perceive the world? How do you perceive yourself? How do you perceive God? How do you perceive your parents? Everything, right? And then if any of these are blocked, your connection to your higher powers not good or non-existent, right? And so if I can get all of your chi open and flowing and those energies centers spinning at the right momentum, then your energetic field expands. And then every person I've ever worked on says, I just feel lighter.
That's awesome.
I can't explain it. And it's beautiful. And the amount of emotion that gets processed in that amount of time is, I've sobbed with people.
That's incredible.
It's such a rewarding job. And to be able to do this intuitively is pretty rewarding. So
that's so great. Yeah. So how would folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can reach me at painfreeforgood7@gmail.com. You can also reach me, I'm on Instagram mostly. I am on Facebook as well, but Instagram's kind of my jam.
Instagram's Pain-Free for Good. Okay.
Yep. And I'd be happy to meet with anybody with any condition, and I love my job.
Awesome. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on. It was very informative, and let's go heal the world.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Doing good stuff. Thanks.